see a few familiar faces in the attendees so far. So welcome to them. Hope you're all enjoying a DrupalCon. I know it's only sort of started the last few hours, but it looks like there's a really good lineup of speakers and things going on. So I hope you've all got it booked into your diaries, and hopefully your work's giving you enough time to actually attend some of these things. So hello, Enrique. Hello, Wilfred, Alberto, James and Jessica, hi. Ashan, Stephanie. We've got Lisa, Helge. Probably getting all these names really wrong, aren't I? Hi, Tim. Marie-Therese, probably got that wrong as well, but welcome. Let's go for a few more minutes for people to arrive. I think we're quite looking forward to this week. We're involved in the last DrupalCon at Cyberduck, and we had a booth, and the booth was fun. So we thought we'd up our game a bit and do a workshop. So this is a workshop. I guess it's a little bit limited with hop-in, but we'll do what we can. It is interactive. It should be enjoyable. Give us a good opportunity. Over an hour to talk about this subject matter, and really looking forward to hearing from you, your thoughts on this subject, your pain points, and see if at the end of this we'll try and come up with some real practical advice or suggestions on how you can get your UX and design and dev teams working together. And a lot of this stuff also will be you can use it for the whole company or the whole business you work in. So how are we doing for people? 12 or 13 people in. What should we wait? What's our minimum numbers?
Well, I think if we give it another minute and then we can kick off.
Yeah.
It looks like we have got a question coming in from Lisa. So let's see if I can add her in.
That was a surprise. You dragged straight in. Hi, Lisa.
Actually, quite literally, the question, which I noted other people also gave thumbs up for, so I wasn't the only one with the question, was should I ask to share audio and video since this is a workshop, or just sit back and wait? But it seemed like nobody was like, I didn't know if anyone was watching the chat at the time, so.
No, that's fine. So it is, as Duncan says, it is a workshop, probably with a bit of a small W at the beginning. So more of let's call it an interactive seminar. So where we've got a Q&A portion at the end, that would be the time to really request to share screen and or share video and audio and everything like that. But throughout, we've got more polls and interactivity on the chat, so you won't have to worry.
Yeah.
So basically, most of us shouldn't be, you can kick me out if you want, like requesting audio, video. I don't know. I'm here now. I'm not one of the presenters.
Yeah. We'll throw you out. But it's nice to see you.
Nice seeing you.
Yeah, so there is I think we'll have plenty of time towards the end for a Q&A session. So yeah, you're welcome to either speak in person, like Lisa just did, or just ask in the chat or the Q&A tab on Hopin if you're really familiar with Hopin. So either of those will work. So let's crack on, shall we? Okay, so I've sort of already rambled on a little bit about what we're going to do today. So let's kick this off formally. Welcome to our workshop. This workshop is entitled Creating Great UX with Drupal. So the intersection of development and design. Quality user experiences are vital for the success of your brand, and users need to be able to reach their goals in a meaningful, easy, and enjoyable way when they interact with your product, whether that's a website or an app or some other form of digital interaction. To achieve this, we at Cyberduck believe it's crucial that UX thinking is integrated through every step of the building and the development process. And on the converse of that is that development also very, very closely integrated with the UX side of the project. So in this workshop, we'll be discussing how development and the UX teams can collaborate in ways that are productive and beneficial for both sides, and talk about very specifically how we've decided to do that at Cyberduck. As I've already said, for those that have just joined, we think there's probably two really important learning points from what we're going to talk about today, and obviously we'll come across those as we go to them. So I think we're going to just do introductions for ourselves in the next slide. So I'll introduce myself first, and then James will introduce himself, and we're also ably assisted by Jessica, who's going to keep an eye on the chat and launch the polls for us, and probably get involved with some of the chat later on. So let's crack off. Are we showing the presentation, Jess?
Are you able to see the presentation?
We can't see that. Okay.
Not currently, no.
That's great. So we're only going to keep our cameras on for the introduction section, and when we start chatting to you towards the end. That's really not because we're not wonderful to look at, because obviously we are, but it's more to do with the fact that if we keep our cameras on, the replay function and hopping makes the slides very, very small, so people can't read them. So let's crack on. So hi, my name's Duncan Worrell. I'm a technical lead at Cyberduck. I've been with Cyberduck for about 2 years, but working with Drupal for, I think, about 12 years, starting with Drupal 6, working through 7, 8, and obviously now working with 9 and looking forward to 10. So my role as a technical lead, certainly at Cyberduck, is I look after some of our key clients, some very big clients, and also I keep an eye on what and how the development team are working. But I feel one of my main responsibilities within the company is to evangelize about Drupal and to improve the way that we at Cyberduck do Drupal. So that's really what this workshop is about. So that's basically me, and I will pass on to James.
Yeah, cheers, Duncan. Yes, so I'm James Martin, one of the senior UX designers here at Cyberduck. Been in the company for roughly 2 to 3 years. And in that time worked on many of the Drupal build projects that we've had coming through, one of which we'll be talking to you about today. And this also is my first time at DrupalCon, so it's really, really good to be here. It's great to speak to all of you lovely people. And hopefully you enjoy hearing me as much as I enjoy speaking to you. So before we crack on, I think we're still having problems sharing the slides, Jess. I'm not able to see that yet.
Shall we try turning our cameras off and see if that helps the slides to show?
Let's give that a go.
Can you see those?
No, not yet. Very strange.
James or Duncan, could you try to share them, and let's see if we can see them that way?
Yes, 1 second. Let me see if I can get it up. Apologies, everyone, but what fun would it be without some technical issues along the way?
Let me fill this gap with something a little bit more about why I joined Cyberduck. I was looking for a new role, and I came across the job advert at Cyberduck, and I was really attracted to the culture at Cyberduck. Secondly, the logo for Cyberduck. Thirdly, because it was relatively close to where I lived. Now we're working remote, but the fourth thing I think was the whole UX-led design approach that we've adopted here at Cyberduck. We'll talk about that more in a minute, but I think this whole discussion about UX-led design approaches is one of the main selling points of Cyberduck. This isn't a big promotion for Cyberduck, but obviously we're going to keep talking about our company because we love the way we do things. We're not perfect. We're always trying to improve the way we do things. But I think that whole approach that really spoke to me as a developer, and we've tried to increasingly work together with the front end team. Well, that's weird, isn't it? That's like a forever screen of screens. There we go. It's like we're sharing screens. There we go. Now, hopefully, everyone can see that with a thumbs up in the chats.
Sorry, one sec. I just had to unmute myself before playing. Okay, so we should now be okay. I now, of course, can't see the chat or anything like that. So, Duncan or Jess, if you could confirm that we're fine.
Yes, all good. Sorry for the technical issues. I'm not sure what happened there.
No, that's absolutely fine. Okay, so you already know enough about us for now, so we won't worry about that. But to begin with, I think it would be a great idea for us to get an idea of who we've got in the session with us today. So you should all have access to the polls feature on Hopin. So we're just hoping that you could tell us what your role is. It'd be great to understand if we've primarily got developers or if there are a few wild cards, other designers and things out there as well. And we'll just give you 30 odd seconds to fill that in.
If your foot is in more than one camp, just answer with the one you feel you most feel like you belong to. I'm going to respond, actually. I'm going to respond as developer. Okay.
So it looks like we mostly have developers here with us today. We have 57% developers.
Okay, great. I suppose that is to be expected, given that we are at DrupalCon. What are the other 44%? What kind of variety have we got?
We have some design, some PM. 2 people have voted for other.
Stick in the chat what your other is, so we can speak to you as well.
But yeah, safe to say for the moment though, it's great that we've got a bit of diversity in the crowd. But yes, of course, primarily developers, as I said, to be expected, and really it's the relationship between design and developers that we're going to be talking a lot about today, particularly UX design, as the name implies. So, with that in mind,
this is really just a question for the developers in the room, and we want you to be really honest here. Certainly, as a developer, I've experienced some frustrations with working with design and UX. So let's have another poll straight off the bat here. Be honest, devs, do you find UXs help or hinder the development process? And we've only given you 4 options, so you can't sit on the fence. You either think they're helpful in some way or you think they hinder you in some way. So let's go to that poll and see what sort of response we get just from the developers.
Just going back to the last question, Lisa says, I'm a developer, but often I'm the one working as a bridge with the UX and UI people.
Oh, that's great. Then you'll be a great person to give some extra insights during this session. So I mean, that kind of bridging role is something that we all at Cyberduck, we try to fill that place, but naturally, where we do have the separate departments for those separate tasks, it's managing that relationship in a wider team, which can often have challenges. But that said, being one of the lone advocates of both sides does definitely toss up its own unique challenges as well. So it'd be great to speak a bit more about that.
Okay, we have the poll results coming in. So 66% of people say sometimes help. The other 33% say sometimes hinder.
Lovely. So actually a much more positive response than I feared we might get. So no, that's good. We're not. I'm not in a group of people that are all avidly anti-UX. That's always a nice position to be in as a UXer. Naturally, though, the sometimes I think is key there. And it's an interesting thing that hopefully we'll be able to clear up. Realistically, what we'd like, ideally, is for at the end of this, for everybody to walk away thinking always. That's obviously our goal here today. But yes, at the same time, though, as a UXer and speaking, let's say, bluntly about my comrades, not all UXers can be the best and the most forthcoming when it comes to working with developers. Of course, some are great. But that's not always the case. So we can definitely understand where those frustrations can come from. So another question for all of you in the room today. And you might be thinking at this point that, the purpose of this session is just to keep mine and other UXers' egos in check. But if I could ask you to indulge me and simply write in the chat what word comes to mind when you think about working with UXers. Again, it'd just be quite good to understand the kind of current perception and working relationship as it is at present. And again, we'll give 30 odd seconds so we can start getting some answers in.
We have another interesting answer from Lisa in the chat where she says, I think no matter what, this never works without both sides working together.
Yeah, that's great. I couldn't agree with you more. Really couldn't agree with you more. And here it's certainly at Cyberduck. I know that is our whole ethos is working in that way. But naturally, the intention and the reality sometimes don't line up. That's certainly something that we've experienced in the past. I'm sure most people here would have as well. But so it's figuring out how to further improve and always keep optimizing that relationship and that way of working. That's really the goal, and hopefully that as well, that's what will give you some insights on throughout the course of this talk.
So in terms of words that come to mind when you think about working with UXers, we have a couple of people have said collaboration.
Yeah, perfect. Again, that's exactly the kind of impression that we would like to give off. So it's a really good start, positive start for the UX out there.
Tim says they make the development challenging.
That's interesting. Certainly, I'm sure Duncan could speak a bit more to experiencing that. But it'd be great as well to get in the chat if you want to elaborate a little bit more how. The ways in which that you find that the UXs can be challenging.
Certainly my past experience has been that, and I put this in the chat myself, that they sometimes don't get it. They don't understand Drupal. They give you designs that just you go, "Whoa, what's this? That's so hard to do." Whether the Drupals would have done that so easily out of the box, and we will be talking about that later on. Of course, the answer is collaboration, but we have some techniques we're going to go through later on that help that collaboration process in a couple of different ways.
Yes, Tim does go on to say they make the development challenging, but that makes it fun. So another positive answer there.
Yeah, that's great.
He says when they design things which I don't know immediately how I would build it.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's good to hear the silver lining, though, the positive approach as well. That's always great to hear. And yes, I think exactly as Duncan said as well. It's I suppose that kind of lack of understanding about Drupal itself. It can lead to a lot of problems, but also, thankfully at least, those problems, those challenges can be quite fun as well. So that's great to hear. So we'll let answers keep coming in, and Jess, do feel free to call out if there's any interesting points for us to come back on. But so what I'd really like to do then is, so to begin with, I suppose I should make the case for my trade. Why is UX important? So user experience, really, it refers to the experiences that people have when they interact with a particular platform. UX design is about designing these experiences to help the user reach their goals. And that really that's the most important point there. It's about the user's goals, the user's needs, the user's pain points, not mine as a UX designer, not Duncan's as a developer. It really is always all about the user. And having those needs at the forefront is incredibly vital. And so actually mega menus and menu design, they're a great example to show how a user experience can go wrong if their design isn't based on UX principles from day one. So a mega menu ultimately provides a simple way to present a large amount of information to the users. But the way it's implemented really needs to be carefully considered to avoid simply causing confusion. So in this example, the categories in the menu aren't laid out in any particularly logical way. So is it alphabetical? No. Is it based on the frequency of use by the users? Maybe. There's probably a logic somewhere, but as a user and as a designer, I certainly couldn't tell you what that logic is. So as users, we're forced to scan through the whole menu, a large amount of information, to find what we need. And really, if you don't read every single label, every title, you're probably not going to find what you were looking for. So the user has to spend more time, get more frustrated, and concentrate a lot more to complete what is really a simple task, all because their needs weren't thought of first. Now, where there is a UX strategy in place, a mega menu can provide a really positive user experience that really helps to guide the user toward the information that they need. Particularly, they can be really great for e-commerce sites with a lot of different product categories, where in that situation, we can really carefully consider the way in which people actually shop. So for example, if you were purchasing wine, you might be inclined to browse based on country or region or food pairings. The example that we've got on screen, though, it really shows the difference when UX thinking has been applied. Here, there are many products and navigation options, but they're organized clearly, and they do quite a good job of giving the user a choice for how they will find the product that they need. So if shopping for skincare products, it's very possible that a user is interested in the product as a direct response to a concern or an issue that they now face or that they face, such as dry skin. And you can see exactly how this has been addressed in the Estee Lauder mega menu. You've got a whole section by concern. Again, dry skin, aging, all of these kind of things that might actually be the motivation behind looking for the product. And ultimately, in recognizing and respecting the user's natural behavior here, the user is enabled to use the site far more comfortably. It becomes a lot more intuitive. So a well thought out mega menu with a focus on the user's actual needs can really be that helping hand that guides them through their own thought making process and helps them toward their goal. Now, of course, I could evangelize for hours about UX mega menus, all of that. But for now, let's take a bit of a step back and think a little bit more about the relationship between Drupal developers and UX. So what we'd like here, again, this is another poll, we'd like to get an idea of, in your opinion, where do you think it makes the most sense for UX to get involved in a Drupal build? So again, we'll give a little while for you to answer that poll.
Just to go back to the comments in the chat, we have a comment, it should be considered, maybe it's a good idea to not keep forcing UX into Drupal.
Oh, controversial. Well, I mean, I would probably combat that. And certainly, I think some of the things that we'll touch on later will go some way to fight that corner as well, because I think the idea that Drupal and UX are mutually exclusive, that they can't work together, I simply think it's just not true. For instance, a big part of UX obviously is the initial research and identifying the behaviors, the way that people think, the way that they work, the problems that they have and the needs that they have of the website and service. Now, whether you were building with Drupal or anything else, it would still be important to understand those needs and problems. Otherwise, you might still build a website that is highly functional, but it doesn't actually solve the right problems. And there you would have the problem, the main issue certainly from the client, from the website side. Beyond that, though, the way that Drupal works, you can still build very user-friendly components, very accessible. All of these things are actually really, really abundantly possible with Drupal. But that is something that we'll speak a little bit more about later, and Duncan can go into a lot of detail on that.
So we have some answers coming in for the poll.
Mm-hmm.
So we have 40% of people say UX should be involved right from the beginning at kickoff, and 60% say at stage 2 planning.
Okay, interesting. So I can happily say that we're on the right side, certainly towards the beginning. But I would say it's incredibly important for UX to be involved from the very beginning. So everybody here that said number 1, you've got a special place in my heart now. It's really important that UX and the design team are aware of any and all initial decisions being made, as well as of any limitations surrounding the build. Otherwise, we may go on to design things that go against the requirements of the project, that aren't technically feasible. All of these kind of issues, they can ultimately as well, they can easily be solved by having those earlier, the first conversations even, being open to all teams, all parties involved in the project in the long run. I would say though as well that it is equally important to note that that isn't a one-way street. So in projects that begin with discovery and UX, I would also say developers should be involved from day one as well. And again, you know, I know that some UXers aren't necessarily always the best at communicating with developers. Again, some are amazing at it, but some aren't. Certainly at Cyberduck, this is something that we're really pushing ourselves more and more to be even better at. As by doing so, it means that from the very beginning, developers are aware of the users and the client's needs. We can share the rationale behind the decisions that are being made on our side, but also it means that we can understand the problems, the limitations, and all of those considerations from the developers' perspectives. And that's ultimately, I think, the most important point here, is that early involvement and the consistent involvement throughout the whole process. It really helps all teams to have an understanding of each other's positions. It avoids the unnecessary friction and the wasted time that can go along with that, just by us all speaking just that little bit earlier. And again, it's important to say, and you'll hear me saying it a lot, that it is all about the user's needs after all. All of us, all of the different teams involved, we're all actually trying to achieve the same goal. So that brings me on to the next question I would like to ask. So I'm really interested to know what, if any, methods that all of you here today use to find out information about your users. If you just type your answers into the chat here. Of course, the answer might be none at all. It might not be. It might depend on the size of your team, your organization. But we'd be really keen to understand, to hear what kind of things you currently do.
You also be pleased to hear this. I think this is one of the last questions. We start getting into some nitty gritty soon, some recommendations, some experiences we can share about how we've improved what we are doing at Cyberduck. So it's I certainly, all my time as a developer, I've created my own sites from scratch, and I know for a fact I'm not a web designer, I'm a web builder. So I tend to lean towards doing the site that I thought my users wanted, and I think the whole point of UX is that we end up designing the site what the users of the site want, not the owner or the developer. So there's lots of good reasons why UX is important, but certainly shouldn't be limited in what we do. Nothing in chat yet. Must be just UX.
So we have an answer from Lisa, who says, I've done literally studying how users are using the tool, also getting feedback from ticketing systems. And if I have no input, I can Google some common approaches. Sadly, user research is often overlooked.
I think that's a really good point about the overlooking of user research. And to be honest, that's not necessarily even unique to to any particular organization or client or anything, a lot of the time you will come up against people who do not value necessarily what it is that user research can really bring. Again, I think the best way that I've ever thought to word it to skeptics is basically to say, what happens if you say, either I don't know, or rather I know everything about my users, so I don't need to worry about research, or you simply say, well, is it worth the time and the effort, the money that it's going to cost to do it? And that's the really important thing to have in your mind at that point is, well, okay, say that you don't do it. And again, you might build a website. It might be absolutely fine. It might even satisfy the needs of the users to begin with. But what happens a year down the line, even a few months down the line? The world changes, and it changes very quickly. Certainly, we've all seen that over the last couple of years with the things that we've seen. So what happens if the users' needs change and you aren't aware of those changes? Then all of a sudden your website isn't fulfilling their needs, your product isn't fulfilling their needs anymore. Someone else comes along and they have done their user research. They're a little bit more in tune with what the current landscape is and what people are really looking for. And then all of a sudden your product, your website is replaced by the website that does it better. And I mean, anybody that's been aware of the goings on of the internet for the course of the last 20 years probably can think of a 1,000 different instances where the market, the real dominant market force, has been overtaken by someone who just did something a little bit differently, a little bit better. And it's all because
I'm still on MySpace, James. Is that not in vogue?
Exactly. Look to poor old MySpace and Tom, who I'm pretty confident now has very few friends as a result. And even then, if you imagine a situation wherein Facebook were to stop thinking pragmatically about what its users want and things like that, how easy would it be for them to be unseated? After all, people's loyalty to digital products is not unwavering. All it takes is someone to do something a little bit better, a little bit easier, and all of a sudden, you're done. So, in terms of answers for methods for finding out research about users, have we had anything come in, or shall we move on to talking about how we would advise?
We have a good point that user research costs extra money, and you have to figure out how to convince the customer that it's worth it.
Again, another really, really good point. One of the main arguments that can be made for UX, and it sounds bizarre at first, but it's the fact that in the long run it saves you money. It's an upfront cost, and really that's the way to look at it. Is you aren't going to spend more money, you're just going to spend a little bit more money earlier, I suppose, is the way to look at it. Because again, if you imagine that situation where you go ahead and you build, but you don't necessarily understand the users, you get all the way to a website, to the point where the website has been launched, and then you start finding the problems. With work that you've already done and put a lot of work into, the cost to develop is far greater than the cost to have a UX resource talking to users and wireframing and user testing. That's the key part. After we've put together our prototypes, we can iterate far, far quicker and far, far cheaper than it was possible to do on a live website with actual building. So I would say that's the main point really to take away on that is it's easy to be put off by the upfront cost, but the amount that will save you in the long run is far greater. Anyway, so we'll move on to talking about ways that we can start looking at user research. So first and foremost, one of the most important things that you can do, probably the most important thing that you can do, is to actually speak to your users. Ask them their opinions of site features, create surveys, observe them interacting with the site. That's a really good one to do. Basically, let go of any assumptions that you might have about how the interface and the product is working, and really let their feedback guide you. Those conversations with users are going to be more valuable than anything that you could ever do. You'll learn things that you never dreamed that could have come out of those sessions. So really couldn't advise that enough. And that's whether you're whether you're a designer, a developer, or a project manager, or anybody, if you can find a time and a way to have a conversation with your users, the insights you'll get are invaluable. But beyond that, if you look to analytics, obviously these are great ways to see what pages are being visited, what's popular, what's not, and ultimately to try and identify if there's any dead weight that can be removed. And ultimately then you streamline the user journey, you make it simpler to get from A to B. And lastly, we've got heat maps here. So by looking at heat maps, you can really assess where the users are getting confused. You can look out for behavior like rage clicking to identify the areas and the steps that are causing the most frustration to users. It can also help you to see as well if the users are being drawn towards the content that you want them to be. Like, is the hierarchy on the homepage pulling the user towards the primary call to action, for example, or are they getting caught up, looking at the things which really don't have, let's say, a high business priority, maybe? So it's important to note as well that user experience design isn't only important for the end user. It really does bring benefits to all people working on the build. And so here are some reasons why really devs should love UX as well, other than the fact, of course, that it means you don't have to worry about those previous activities of talking to users and everything like that. But so the first point is that we can really help to create a clear roadmap. So UX and UX-based prototypes do really provide quite a strong foundation for the build. They show exactly what you need to achieve as a developer and what you need to get there. So when a project has gone through a robust UX process, developers can ultimately have confidence in the fact that all design elements are there for a reason. They've been researched, they've undergone usability testing. So the second point here is that our work can really help to save your time as well as your sanity. If a site is built without a UX framework in place from the very beginning, it's quite likely that issues will be uncovered further down the line, not because of the code, the quality of the build or anything like that, but as I mentioned before, but simply as a result of not meeting the user's needs. For instance, after the website is already built, you realize that the information architecture doesn't work or the menu is too confusing. All of that, the developers will have to go back and fix retroactively. That's twice the work, twice the time, twice the money. And this is where the point about the value of doing upfront research and UX work really comes into it. Because with a strong UX approach from the very beginning, this is far less likely to happen. Now, next, really UX insights can lead to easier conversations because ultimately UX design provides the reasoning behind every aspect of the design and the build. So for developers and designers alike, this is going to make it much easier when it comes to answering questions that you'll face from stakeholders and clients when they're asking, why is this thing the way that it is? Well, it's the way that it is because of all of the research that we've done, all of the conversations we've had previously. It also helps if the client, let's say, is going to request last-minute changes, then you'll be able to push back, knowing that in fact there are good reasons why the site has been built in this particular way. Now, beyond that, we can really help to ensure that what we're building is the right thing and we're building it for the right reasons. So developers, I would ask yourself, can I really build a good website? Now, maybe yes and maybe no. And I beg you to not take that to heart. After all, if you were to ask me, could I build a good website? The answer would almost certainly be no. With UX and design, there are a lot of factors to think about when designing a modern website, from responsiveness to accessibility. And this is why, if you are in that fortunate position of having dedicated teams in your business, it is usually best to rely on the specialists to take care of those different elements of the build so that ultimately everyone, that's, me and you, everybody involved, is working to their strengths. And the UX team are there ultimately to let developers deliver the things that they need to deliver without having to worry about user experience. And the key thing here really is to not end up building something just because you can, but instead really focus on what is actually required by the users. So collaborative environments, it's important to say, that means knowledge sharing, better relationships. And when UX and development teams work together, it provides opportunities for open communication, multiple perspectives, new ideas from both sides that you wouldn't have got before. Developers will bring valuable insights to the design process thanks to their specialist technical insights, things that me as a UX designer would never have thought of, and vice versa. When the teams are blended from that early stage, everyone involved can really learn from each other, develop much healthier working relationships that will really enrich all projects they work on together in the future. And lastly, UX design, it does facilitate a better end product, which is great for the teams, it's great for the company, the client, it's great for the users. Remember, UX designers and developers, as I said before, we're all working towards a common goal, and that goal is to create the best possible finished product. So you'll end up with the website that the clients actually need, as Duncan says, rather than the one necessarily that they originally wanted. And crucially, the user will end up with the website that they actually need as well. And I'll hand over to Duncan to talk about the benefits of UX and how we get them.
Brilliant. Sorry, I was on mute there. Typical Zoom mute issue. Okay, so this section is really trying to sort of come up with some real usable things we can do to help the devs and the UX and designers work together. So the first on the list is an understanding of users' needs. Devs should have a clear view of what the users want, need, and expect. With this, it helps both guide what we're developing, and I think really importantly, when there's a tight budget or tight times and tight timescales, it also helps us limit the build. Many developers I've worked with will do things because they're cool. If they're not required, they shouldn't be building them. They can certainly be added to a backlog for future sort of consideration, but it does help both guide and limit the build. As developers, it's important to be included in the UX and the design process from the very beginning, as James has already said. The sooner we start talking to clients, to the UX, to the designers, to the project managers, to everyone else in the team, the more we can feed back and make sure that the product at the end of the day is the product we're asking for. This leads us on to the next point. So strong integration between the teams is crucial at every stage of the design and the build, especially during COVID, when remote working can mean the different teams become siloed. Our experience here at Cyberduck was that we've been able to turn the negative aspects of working from home into real benefits. We've had to find much stronger methods of working together within and across project teams, technical departments, and with other teams across the business, including UX and design. Communication. Don't just expect that devs and designers will understand what the other is doing. Of course, they're specialists. Devs don't understand designers, and designers don't understand devs. In fact, we're in awe of each other, and we should be, because we've got probably many decades of experience behind us. Frequent communication is one of the most important things you can do to ensure that everyone is on the same page. Regular stand-ups, show and tells, meetings, and updates mean that the UX team and developers can stay in touch with what each other are doing. And that works also with clients and PMs and other members of the team. We often talk about handovers when the design is handed over to the developers, but a design handover shouldn't be treated like a relay race, where the designers simply hand over their work to the developers and then disappear. Even when devs have been over the design, until you start developing or until real-world content is added to your designs, you probably won't spot a heap of things that simply do not work as they were designed. Having the UX team still on hand means that the devs don't need to make design or UX decisions that they may not have the user research to back up. That's really important. Sometimes it's easy as a developer to go, I know what we need here. I'll just do this. It's important just to to take a step back and say, okay, this is what I think we should do. Let's just check that with the UX and the design team. The design team and the UX team might have a really good reason why they haven't done that. So talk to them. And as the dev ramps up, keep your friendly UX and designer on the project. Keep them there, even if it's just an hour a week, 2 hours a week, so you can call on them when it's necessary to do so. Visual references are really important. So once you have these visual references thoroughly annotated, and we're talking about things like wireframes and designs, it provides a much clearer roadmap for the devs to work on than a written documentation alone. Everyone learns and takes in information differently. I certainly would much rather design or code from a screenshot than I would a description of what the functionality is supposed to do. But likewise, the visual references should be supported by words, hence the annotation that's required, and obviously often supported by tickets as well. That would force the devs not to make up design decisions themselves. So this can result in designs are both functional, but otherwise, if you do it wrong, it might end up with designs which is not quite what users wanted. Everyone these days works in Agile. There's lots of really good things about working in an Agile environment, but for me, one of the major benefits of Agile working is that you can iterate solution, both within the team and with the client. If a design that's been signed off will take a week, when a small change would bring that down to a day, or a design no longer works when real world content is added, then you can have that opportunity to reassess. And I think that's really important, this iteration process. I'm even not really talking about sprints here. I'm talking about iterating across the design. One of the key bugbears I have with designers in the past is they'll show you something and you just throw your arms up and go, oh, that would be so much easier if it was done differently. Oh, tell them. Perhaps they can change it. Perhaps it's not too late. So during early phases of UX, devs should feed back on the designs to make sure we're offering the client the best value for money. And that's really important. It's particularly important if it's a time and materials type project. Obviously, it's even more important if it's a fixed price contract you've got. If you can do something quicker, then obviously your company is going to be more profitable. So when design comes back with some crazy login page, you can go, hold on a sec, Drupal does this pretty well already, or we can show them something like the Gin login module, which I really like. Discovered that, I think, probably at the last DrupalCon. Great presentation on the Gin module there with Gin login. So that have a look at that Gin login module, looks really cool. So if the UX and design team don't know about those solutions, how on earth can they possibly suggest them at design time? And that brings me to the final and probably the most important point. Educate everybody. If the designs that come to you as a developer make you throw your arms up with exasperation, whose fault is that? The onus is very much on the developers to educate the rest of the business on the best way to work. Rather than working against Drupal, we end up working with Drupal. At Cyberduck, we do a few things. We host regular lunch and learn sessions, normally sort of between half an hour or an hour over a lunch. So those who are interested can learn a bit more about Drupal. Sometimes they're quite technical, sometimes they're sort of a bit more holistic, but it does give the opportunity to show people a little bit more about Drupal if they're interested. The development, UX and design leads, and I'm one of the tech leads, of course, we have weekly retrospectives to constantly improve the way we work together. These aren't project retrospectives, they're whole company retrospectives. Has there been a pain point in one of the designs we've seen recently? Is there something we can help you with to help you understanding of your Drupal, of how to work with Drupal? So those weekly meetings are really important. And then, of course, those leads will take away the findings of those meetings back to their respective teams. Something we also started doing recently is we have what we call a company announcement meeting every Friday. It lasts for an hour. It gives our CEO, Danny, a chance to tell everybody in the company what's going on. We go through birthdays, we do timesheet of the week, believe it or not. We even talk about what films are coming out at the moment, but it also gives the whole company a chance to see what new projects we've won, what projects are in the pipeline. And something we started doing really recently is we, the devs, not me, we run a 3-minute session, which we call we call it Duncan's Drupal demystifier, which is hilarious, of course. So that is really a short session, but because everyone is in that meeting, it gives me a real good opportunity to educate the whole company on how Drupal works and how we should be using it within Cyberduck. It's really important. This discussion is really about UX and design and devs working together. But of course, once the new business team, project managers understand a bit more about Drupal, they can start selling or managing projects that little bit better. And it makes the whole company work better if people understand Drupal. Drupal is a great framework. It's got a big learning curve. The devs know how to use Drupal, but no one else does. So it's up to us to educate them. And there's one final point here on my list. We encourage all other departments to do the same. As part of our company announcement meeting, we have an accessibility section, another 3 minutes. We have an SEO section, and we have other sections that happen too. So it's really important that this whole educating outside of your area of expertise is something that we would encourage all departments within your company to do, especially where our work overlaps.
So this is all well and good, but how does it work in practice? Without those constant lines of communication during a build, this is where the room for miscommunication comes in. This is where we have our areas of inefficiency, our crossed wires. So as Duncan's pointed out, collaboration really is, I can't stress enough how much of an important part of our methodology at Cyberduck that really is. When we were working on the Oscar Kilo website, that's the home of the National Police Wellbeing Service here in the UK, we wanted to see how far we could push that collaboration, how much earlier could we integrate different teams, and how long could we keep it going throughout the project lifecycle. The project itself, it involved a complete UX-focused redesign, so really starting with a good amount of user research, all of the work into service mapping and personas and all of that, going into wireframing, prototyping, testing. So it was a complete UX-focused redesign and a Drupal rebuild of the old WordPress Oscar Kilo website, which you can see on the screen at the moment, the old site. From the beginning, as I mentioned, there was really extensive collaboration between the UXers and the developers. COVID, of course, as Duncan mentioned, it brought extra challenges in terms of communication between the teams. We're actually at Cyberduck, we're used to working remotely even before the pandemic with members of staff all over Europe, in the US, in South America even. But this was one of the first projects where everybody was going to be working remotely throughout the entire project with no in-person contact whatsoever. This was towards the, or it was within the first lockdown. So absolutely start to finish, everything over Zoom. And that's exactly how it was. All meetings, all sessions, feedback sessions, they were all taking place over Zoom for the first time. And what we would do in the UX team, we would fill in the devs, but we would go to a deeper level than we ordinarily would. So after we had sessions with stakeholders, those initial workshops and interviews, we then had sessions with the developers to share those insights. And the same after user interviews, after service mapping, and all of the other UX activities. We always made sure that we were then having follow-up sessions with the developers as well to make sure that everybody understood from the very beginning the kind of things that were being said. After all, we were that one step more removed from each other now. So you had to go that one step further to make sure that no one was being left behind or left out, or that information wasn't being lost. And so that's how both teams went forward with this project. Both teams were transparent about everything they were working on, documents shared, files organized and distributed out to everybody involved on our shared Slack channels and all other mediums as well. So when it came to the first round of low fidelity wireframes, as you can see on the screen, the UX team, here is where we really started ramping up our meetings with the developers. So we started having regular stand-ups every 2 days, I think, even maybe even more than that at certain times. But regular stand-ups specifically with the developers, so that we could discuss with them and ultimately find out any red flags that were being pulled out, even at this early stage. Is there anything that you see which is going to be a problem? You know, is there anything that we need to consider? Are there any modules, any components that we should have in mind at this early stage? Anything really that could impede the build by the time it got to the developers. And that process continued all the way through the project, through high fidelity wireframes, prototypes, the final UI, and beyond. As I said, we held real feedback workshops after user testing and got the developers' insight at that point as well. It was all of these extra sessions that we were opening up to the development team. It meant that the rationale, the things that we knew, you know, why are we making the decisions that we're making? All of a sudden, that wasn't knowledge which was being gated and held just by the UX team. It was being shared to everybody. So everybody knew when something was genuinely important, where it wasn't. Where are the areas where we should be pushing back, and where do we know that actually what's being suggested is justified and we might have to do that extra custom work. And we found that this approach, it really did facilitate a very successful design and build process. It made life infinitely easier, certainly for us in the UX team, and I am told as well in the development team as well. Because ultimately, everything that was coming out of the UX and design teams, the way it was designed, it was already 95% of the way there by the time it came to the development stage. There were far fewer questions and issues that would come back. And so after the developers began building the site, the access to the UX resource continued. We had UX resource ongoing on this project, literally from start to finish. So if the developers did ever encounter any roadblocks, any questions during the build, they were simply able to discuss it with us, with the UX team, with the designers, and we were able to work out solutions together. And that meant that the build process was a lot more efficient for the developers as well. And it meant ultimately that they could focus on their part of the project rather than having to worry about making those design decisions on the fly as well. And here you can see an example of the detailed prototype that we made for Oscar Kilo with the components in place and ready to be built. And beyond that, here actually is an example of the process that we went through when it came to wireframing. So from wireframing to design to final implementation on an example block for the Oscar Kilo website. And really, the reason that we included this here is to illustrate just how few changes were actually needed from the design stage through to the final build, largely thanks to the close working relationship that we had between teams. You know, we on the UX and design side, because of this new way of working, or this, let's say, slightly improved way of working for this project, we didn't have to worry that by the time the site was built and live, that we would go on and all of a sudden things would look different, you know, where changes have been made and we weren't aware of them. And equally, the developers didn't have to worry about the fact that we were going to be passing them a load of designs which simply just are totally unfeasible, unworkable, or unnecessarily complicated from their perspective. It also illustrates an interesting point, just how close our usual wireframes and designs actually are to the standard Drupal way of working a lot of the time. Of course, sometimes there'll be components that require a custom approach, but many of the kind of standard blocks that we use on a daily basis are actually already there out of the box. So your standard banner design, the kind of thing that you can see on screen at the moment, many things like that, they are consistent in nearly every single project. You know, there's very little that you're often going to do to change these blocks. So it's interesting to note, certainly for UXers, that really we can still be as creative as we like. It's just like this, we can do it in a much more dev-friendly way by working with Drupal rather than against it. Why from the UX side waste our time recreating the same blocks in every single project, when instead we can start working from more of a framework, things that we know are consistent, things that we know that they work. That then frees us up time to be able to worry about bigger UX questions, you know, interactivity, how interactions work in general, microcopy and things like that, which a lot of the time they can unfortunately be overlooked a little bit depending on the project's timeline and budget. So really here, and it's something that Duncan touched upon as well earlier, there is really such a big opportunity for developers to educate their UX teams about how Drupal works so that designs can be Drupal friendly from day one. So when it came to, I guess, looking back at it, what did we learn? Among other things, our primary takeaway from this project and our first major recommendation is really devs and UXers talk to each other. From Oscar Kilo, we learned that strong integration of the teams, frequent communication would lead us to greater efficiency for everyone involved. At all stages of discovery and design, we brought the dev team in, reviewing user interview findings, explaining service maps, talking through our UX recommendations, running wireframes UI past the devs throughout the whole process, the list goes on. All of these things, typically might be a little bit more gated off from the developers in the past. Things where, as I said, we do it, we understand the answers and the results, but we don't really take the time necessarily to share the why behind these decisions. But we found that bringing everybody together as early as possible and as often as possible meant that we all understood each other's perspectives. We in the UX team understood the tech limitations and what changes we would have to make. And the devs understood where and why the UX team might need to push back on something because of legitimate user needs. So the whole team, both developers and UX, benefited from this approach. We saved time. There was far fewer miscommunications, and it really is that simple. Talk to each other. The more that you talk to each other, more of the issues that you face regularly will start to disappear.
Thanks, James. Back to me. Here's another bit of interaction for you. We're keen to understand, given what we've said so far, and there's plenty more to come, what are some of the potential roadblocks to stop UXers and devs collaborating in this way? Be interesting to have some comments in chat that we can go through. But what, do you work this way? Why can't you work this way? What problems have you had working this way? What blockers do you think there would be to working this way? A few seconds for some answers to come in the chat.
I think we had a good answer to this earlier as well when Lisa pointed out that sometimes you have to convince the client that user research is needed. I think sometimes a lack of understanding of the need for UX can be a roadblock.
Yeah, Lisa's talking about budget again. You're absolutely right. Also, of course, the more time you have more people talking in more meetings, the less time they're doing what, I'm doing air quotes, what they should be doing. So I totally get it. There is an overhead of working this way. Of course, there's an overhead, but that overhead should be money that's saved further down the line. And I think that's fundamentally what we're trying to do here. That we decided that we've done some very big projects in the past, and we discovered that every new Drupal project we were doing, we were repeating ourselves. And we said, well, this is silly. Why are we doing this? Let's start talking earlier. Let's involve the developers. And we're not talking about every developer who's going to be on the project. We're talking about, possibly a front end and a back end developer that comes along to every UX sort of show and tell that happens with the clients. And Lisa again is talking about accessibility. Clients don't get it. Why do we need to be accessible? Same with testing. Why do you write code that tests our code? That doesn't make any sense. Well, it does, and it doesn't make any sense until you realise that actually saves you money down the line. It's all about quality. It's all about value. I've written some horrendous websites in my past with Drupal that just were completely unusable because I was doing these things on my own. But I think once you start to bring in expertise and from other specialists, you do immediately see the benefits. That's some of the things that James has already talked about. you see it becomes very clear why the menus are organized as they are. And I know we used mega menus as an example earlier on. We're not dissing mega menus. Sometimes there's a good place for them, but the information architecture is one of the key things that comes out of UX. We've had lots of clients that have come to us and said, nobody can find the information on our website. And all that people do is they go to search. They go, oh, I can't find this. I'll try the search button. The trouble with search as a solution is that, well, one word, Google. Your search solution in your website will very normally not be as good as Google. Google has, certainly more than developers working than you've got working in your department. So that search solution is never going to be particularly good. So your website needs to be a find engine. It needs to show people, lead them, signpost them to find the information I'm looking for. And that second example of the mega menu we gave with, I think it was Estee Lauder, was a really good example of that, where you might come in looking for, issues with dry skin or aging, or you might be coming looking for a particular product or a brand. And what we're trying to do here is ultimately make the website work better for users. And if that's not the goal of the client, then what on earth is the goal of the client? Is it a vanity project? And you will see that. You will see clients that go, I know what my clients want, my users want. They often don't. They often think they know exactly what the users want. It's not until you start speaking to clients, to their users, that you can come back to them and say, well, your users are saying this. And they go, oh, you know what, we have heard that in the past. And it becomes evident very quickly that they don't know what their users need. And that's where the benefit of the whole UX process brings to the whole project.
It is interesting as well. There's the point obviously about accessibility there as well, and really just making, or rather the lack of, let's say, appreciation necessarily about the importance of things like accessibility. And that's something that you'll face a lot. You really will. But there is some really important points to be raised when it comes to that issue. For instance, certainly here in the UK, in the US, and in many other countries as well, there are laws governing accessibility, certainly in terms of the need for it in any kind of public sector, government type website, product or service. So if you're anywhere near a project like that in the public sector, then you have a legal requirement to be accessible. Beyond that, depending on where you are, the argument for accessibility is becoming more prevalent. If you think that it is going to become less of a requirement to be accessible, then I'm afraid I would say that you are likely to be wrong. It will be a matter of time before it becomes a standard requirement, not least of all because you have, even in terms of how you perform on Google, accessibility now is a factor that will affect your standing there. So accessibility is something that realistically you don't have much of a choice going forwards, I should say. And I think the thing which makes accessibility really hard for some people to relate to is not having any kind of accessibility needs themselves. But I would also say that anybody that says that, I think that they aren't using their imagination necessarily. If you take certain examples of really common accessibility needs, things like having to have sufficient color contrast ratios. Now, on the face of it, your eyesight is fine. That's not a big problem to you, until you realize that actually every single time you look at your phone at night and your screen automatically adjusts to be darker, all of a sudden the color contrast is starting to become a problem. So obviously that's not the same thing, but when you start dealing with accessibility issues, you rapidly start realizing that they do actually help everybody, even if the way that they are helping everybody isn't necessarily obvious to begin with. Similar to, if you've got to consider the kind of temporary issues that can happen to people as well. What happens when it comes to navigating an app on a smartphone if you break your hand How easily you're going to cater towards that. That kind of temporary issue, the way that you would potentially solve it would be the solution you would use for a more permanent accessibility issue as well. What I mean to say is that accessibility isn't always obvious how it is going to help everybody. But if you think about the example, for instance, of a ramp, leading you up past a set of stairs out in the real world, on the face of it, you would think, well, the ramp's being built to help, let's say, somebody who's using a wheelchair. But in reality, you're also helping people who have a pram with a baby in it. You're helping anybody who has a shopping trolley. Potentially, you're helping someone who just has, a bit more of an issue with stepping up the stairs. So let's say, mobility issues that might be more prevalent just because you're old and your knees and ankles aren't quite in the shape that they once were. So the accessibility issue really is interesting. I sympathize wholeheartedly, though, with how hard it can be for some people to understand its importance. But as I said, the legal requirement is a big thing, and it will only get more. And the fact that accessibility and working in an accessible way actually helps people in general, not only the people that have the accessibility issue, it helps everybody typically.
And that same argument holds for UX in general. The designers will, they'll know which color contrasts work. They know which colors look nice together, which colors work together. And this is all part of that. Oh, can't we just have red and blue? Well, you can, but it'll look horrible. I saw a website recently for I'm not going to say it was. I looked at it and thought, that is revolt. That is such a bad website. Hopefully we're going to redo it for them. But James is 100% right. The whole accessibility argument, it sits next to the UX argument. They're both so important because ultimately you want people to be able to use your website. And whether that's a situational disability, like you've broken your arm, or I have to wear glasses these days, it does help everyone use the website, and that's what UX is all about. Certainly, we consider accessibility and responsiveness and UX very, very early in any website we do. It means, as James has already said, we don't have to redo a website further down the line when you do a test on your website, or whether it's a security pen test or an accessibility test, and you fail. We did a website recently for a government organization. We had a strong mind to keep an eye on accessibility, and the very first test for accessibility we scored 98%. 1.5% of that we fixed within a week. And the only 0.5% left, and I kid you not, the only 0.5% left was that in Google Maps, Google's logo does not have an alt tab on it. It has no alt text. So that was the only thing the website now currently fails on. And that in itself is I hope they fixed it, but that was the only thing the website failed on. So if you design and UX and develop with all these things in mind from the get-go, your websites just work better for the client, and ultimately a good working website for your client is what we're waiting for.
So before we move on, I suppose the last thing, and I'm not sure if we had any answers in the chat as I can't see it, but one other thing that I think is really important to mention when it comes to potential roadblocks, so certainly something that you hear quite often. We've heard about the budget, but the other side of the budget question is time. We don't have the time to have all of these extra meetings. We don't have the time to get other people involved and so on. And you'll hear that from anybody, not from one particular source, but it's a really common argument to be made. And the answer is realistically quite similar to what we said about budgets as well. It's that upfront, yes, it's a bit more time. There's a few more people involved. So naturally, you can't avoid the fact that it does require a little bit more time from a few more people. But it's really important to note that time that you're using now is time that you're saving later. Those crisis conversations that you'll have closer to a website going live when someone realizes something doesn't work, or the UXers, the designers have checked in and something just isn't what they designed, or the developers find some functionality that we never explained and that won't work. Those kind of crisis responses, they are going to take far more time than involving 2 more people in a couple of half-hour calls earlier in the process. So I think that the time is a really understandable barrier, but I think the understanding, the perception of that is the thing that's really important to note there, is that it's front loading the time, but it is not using more. If anything, it's probably saving time in the long run. So I think with that, let's move on, and I'll let Duncan talk a bit more in depth about some of the other things that we have been doing over at Cyberduck.
So we've talked a lot about collaboration, talking to each other, making sure that we understand each other's point of view. And when we do that on projects, we did this on Oscar Kilo, we've done it across numerous other projects we've built. We were trying to work out an idea for how we could take this collaborative approach even further. Every single site we were doing seemed to have repeated components that we were building in Layout Builder as custom blocks every single website. So we decided to create a component kit. I interviewed someone just before this talk I gave, and he mentioned that his company also used component kits. Lots of people do. Some of those are shared, available as open source. You might have your own that you use inside your own company. But what the component kit does, it provides these components out of the box. That was a massive saving on effort for us as developers, so we could concentrate on building the things that made each site different. So this is a really horrible example we've got here. So the component kit for us is like a starter kit for every Drupal site we work on. We continue to build on it, and when a new website development throws up a new component we think that might be useful, we feed it back into the component library for the next project. So it's an evolving sort of side project we've got that sits within the company. Here we can see some video components which are included in the kit, and they're just positioned in 2 and 3 column sections within Layout Builder. So we do use Layout Builder at Cyberduck for layouts. This isn't going to be a paragraphs versus Layout Builder discussion, and I'm sure there's loads of those out there. You might have a very strong opinion on which is best, but internally at Cyberduck, our reasoning is Layout Builder is in Drupal core, whereas paragraphs isn't, and we expect the majority of the development effort to be in the direction of Layout Builder. So here you can see a few of the custom components down the right-hand side that we use on one of our sites. A campaign block, a simple WYSIWYG content section, and what we call a linked block, which is sort of a clickable card that appears on screens. Of course, we don't use every component on every site. I think our component library has about 20 components in it at the moment. If we included or used every single component on every single site we used, it would probably result in a very confusing site for users and content creators. What we're trying to provide here is an easy website to use. So repeatable patterns works really well for users, and repeatable patterns works really well for content creators. In fact, our experience shows that the fewer components we use, the better the experience is for all. So the component library also includes a base theme. So as well as having a whole lot of custom blocks, we have a custom theme. And what that custom theme does, as you can see in this equally ugly example, is that everything looks sensible and works out of the box. Of course, we'd never use this theme on a client website. It would be terrible. But using that as a base theme and sub-theming from it to create a bespoke theme for every client makes it much quicker to get something up and running for a client to see quickly. We call that theme internally the Cyberduck starter theme. In fact, we call it the Cyberduck starter kit, but I hate that name. We're going to change it to the starter theme because it makes more sense. So if you see starter kit or starter theme, they're the same thing. An example here, what we're showing is our campaign block. That's included within the component kit, and it's themed by the starter theme. There's a whole load of points I'm going to cover here. It's quite a long slide, so bear with me. I've had a sore throat today. So what's all this got to do with devs and UX working constructively together? Hopefully, you've already guessed a few of the benefits. So for UXers, if we have a standard set of components that we're using to build our websites, the UX and the design team can export those components into their design tools. We use Figma here at Cyberduck. And then they can use those as a basis for the sites they design. Every component can be styled to meet specific client branding requirements, and the designers still have a huge amount of freedom to customize each component. When they share the designs with the devs, there will be fewer surprises for the developers because we gave them those components. And so less rework and iteration for the UX and the design team. We're at a point now where the UX team can wireframe with a component kit in mind, and the designers can be guided but not limited by the starter theme. If they know there's a component close to what they already need in the kit, they can use that, or simply make a small change and we can create a variant rather than designing a completely new component, which means more budget gets spent on creating something we sort of had already. We only use, what we're only really talking about here is layout builder components. So if UX and designers can save time on these standard components, these components that we see on every single website, they can spend more time on the entity pages for things like news, events, products, whatever, and on other areas of UX, which James has already touched on, such as microcopy, animation, and interactions, and of course, on better explaining and annotating their decisions when they hand over the designs to the developers. Our component kit and our starter theme are also bundled with a heap of other modules, so we can implement best practice for every website using a base set of modules and configurations. We're talking about things like security, SEO, and content creation. So, how we configure different versions of the WYSIWYG CK editor so that we can use them in different places. It means we're up and running much quicker than we ever used to be. We could build every site from scratch, but we just end up repeating ourselves. Don't repeat yourself. Better to enjoy working on what makes each site different. It also makes it easier to switch between projects as a developer or cover any holidays. I'm going to say this again. It's very boring to have to keep doing things over and over again as a developer. Like diversity in the workplace, diversity in the community, we like to celebrate and enjoy the things that make things different. And that's the same thing goes for when we're developing a website. We don't want to create another news card. Let's use one that just works. We know it works. It's been tested, verified. We know it works. Let's just reuse it. And let's concentrate on the awesome things on the website. Perhaps a really cool calendar, or perhaps, making the events page really pop. And I'd much rather be doing that as a developer than, just doing what I did on the last project. If a client's site needs a new component, that's also totally cool by the developers. We have a framework in place that allows us to create custom blocks, and we can feed that back into our component library for next time. We're agile. We welcome change. Excuse me. Losing my voice. I knew it would be. James, can you take over?
Yeah, sure. So when it comes to clients, by improving our working process, we also deliver better value for our clients. Site builds are off the ground far quicker and they progress at a much greater pace. The client saves budget that they might spend on more development, and they get a solution that's very much tailored to their users' needs. And for content creators, we can provide training on when to use which component. Because the components are tried and tested across multiple websites, we can be sure that they make sense, and when they don't, we can improve them for next time. And for the users, when we are providing a good user experience, the user's interaction with the website should be easy, not hard. They should come to a website and know exactly what they need to get from the website and know that they can get exactly what they came for, whether that's information, a product, or a service. There are design conventions, which mean people expect to see certain configurations of text and media in front of them and be confident that they know how to interact with them. Familiar design patterns actually do make websites easier to use. And I think this is something really important when it comes to talking to your UXers. It wouldn't be surprising if it instilled a little bit of fear or concern from the UXers, a worry that, you know, effectively that our job is being taken away from us. But actually, the way that we work with Drupal, it is no different to the way that you might work using material design, Google Material Design. The only limit really is your imagination, your creativity. All this is a set of user-friendly components, and we can still put them together in the way that we see fit. We can still alter and tweak and all of these different things. So actually, and again, we've said it a few times, it really frees us up to be more creative and to really do some much more interesting things, because it frees us up from the normal, you know, the drudgery, the usual, almost groundwork, that the building of those basic components when it comes to wireframing. It frees us from that and enables us to spend more time, like I said, on really cool interactions and other things which can really make the user experience much better and more rich for the user. So in conclusion, UX really should be baked into the build from the very beginning. Now, our experiences with Oscar Kilo taught us the importance of developers being involved in the design process from very early on. Methods such as analytics, heat maps, these are useful for analyzing the performance of a currently up and running website. However, for the best results, both for users and internal teams, UX really should be fully integrated into a website build right from the very beginning, not seen as an afterthought. And beyond that, as developers, you should really take the opportunity to educate your UXers on how Drupal works. After all, when we understand how Drupal works, we can really start to work with you rather than against. Now, secondly, collaboration is key. And obviously we've spoke about this at good length, but really constant communication, the constant flow of information between the two teams is the most important factor for successful Drupal builds with great user experience really baked into them at their core. And this was our biggest takeaway from our experience with Oscar Kilo and other recent Drupal sites. And it's something that we'll carry forward into all of our future builds. It's worth that tiny bit of extra time being used, bringing more people into those earlier meetings. It really is so worth that time for how much it will streamline all of the process going forward. And that feeds into the next point as well. And that is that, sorry, I think that my thing is out of sync. Never mind. And that leads into the third point, which really is that a strong starting point for UX, design, and developers, this saves time, it saves effort. The more websites that you create, the more, as Duncan said, you'll find that you are repeating yourself. Stop doing that. Create a great starting point. Keep making it greater, keep iterating, keep adding, keep tweaking. After all, if you think about the component kits and things like that, as Duncan mentioned, this is not set in stone. This can evolve. It can change as requirements change. These components, we can make sure that they have accessibility baked into them so that we don't have to worry about accessibility being forgotten anywhere down the line. And all of these things, they reduce the strain on the designers, they reduce the strain on the developers. And by continuing to develop that kit, we continue to strengthen the collaboration process. And really, with these 3 steps you can see here, baking UX in from the very beginning, that includes bringing developers in at the very beginning as well. Constant collaboration, making sure that we never let up when it comes to that communication between teams, and having that really strong starting point, the component kits, the themes, and all of these kind of things. We believe that with these 3 steps, we're really empowering both our developers and our UX designers to actually deliver the best work, the best that they could possibly produce, and enjoy a smoother working relationship all the while. And with that smoother working relationship, you have fewer silos, you have much deeper, better relationships with your colleagues when it comes to work as well. Any new project that you go on to, you're already starting on a really great footing. I think that's an amazing place to be in that early in a project. So one of the final questions before we open up to a broader Q&A that we have for you when all is said and done, we're quite keen to know, at this stage, do you feel better prepared to approach collaborating between devs and UXers? And if so, type your ideas into the chat for, the different things that you might try going forward to improve that collaboration. Okay, we'll give a little while for some answers to start filtering in. Jess, if you can pull some good ones out for us.
So in my experience, one of the most important things is actually pushing for that collaboration to happen in the first place, especially if you're working at a company where the teams don't tend to collaborate much with each other. I feel like actually advocating for that to happen is one of the first steps.
I'll answer that with my voice being croaky. I think because of the natural flow of a website design from start to finish, you obviously go from a point where the project is sold, the project UX happens, the project design happens, the dev happens, the front end development happens, QA, user acceptance testing, and launch. And I think it's only natural that sometimes the people further down that chain don't get brought in early enough. And I think it's the onus. I like the word onus. The onus is very much on the people further down the chain to go, oi, you can really help us by doing things slightly differently. And I think for me personally, my time at Cyberduck, I like I said, I look after some big clients, but I think the biggest thing I brought, and I'm not being big-headed here, the biggest thing I brought to the table is saying, okay, it's not up to the UX to give us Drupal designs. It's up to us to help the UX give us Drupal designs. And if there's one thing you take away as a developer or as a tech lead or as a PM or whatever, or even as a UXer, it's that educational part of the conversation. The starter kit absolutely saves us a heap of time, and that's also good. But that takes a little bit of time to develop. But those conversations can start tomorrow. I'm a real advocate of changing one thing. If you change one thing at a time, you know whether it's worked or not. If you change 3 or 4 or 5 things and something works, you don't know which it was, or if it doesn't work, you don't know which one caused the problem. So change one thing, and the one thing you can change overnight is talking to your colleagues a little bit more and educating them. Whether it's, say to one of the UXers, can I spend half an hour with you just to go through Layout Builder? Or can I show you how fieldable entities work? Or can I show you the out-of-the-box calendar for Drupal from views? Can I show you how comments work? Can I show you the login page? All these things can be done really, really quickly, and they will save you as a developer a heap of time down the line when your developers come back and your designers come back to you and go, here's a login page, and you go, no, just use the Drupal one. And for me, that's something you can change overnight.
We have an answer from Lisa who says, I'm not sure if I've learned so much to change my own habits, but I'm happy to hear that the project I'm on now actually does things right. I can thank you for confirming that we have a good collaboration process. So that's really nice to hear.
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. I mean, I wouldn't want anybody to walk away from this talk and think that, in some way we were hoping to catch people who are doing things bad. Quite the opposite. If everybody were to speak out and say, no, actually, it turns out we're doing it brilliantly, then I would think, from a professional and a personal standpoint, that's absolutely fantastic. So it's really, really good to hear.
But don't ever stop improving. There's always room for improvement. Constant improvement is one of the fundamental aspects of our business. Digital transformation and design, and creating great technical solutions. So never stop thinking about better ways to work. If from a technical point of view, think about new components that a website might need, or from a UX point of view, say to the developers, is there a thing that can do this? And the developers can go, of course, there's a module for that. I should get that tattooed. There's always a module for that. And the better you can educate, the better you communicate, the more the UX and design team can learn about Drupal, the more you'll probably learn about Drupal. But conversely, the more you'll learn about the whole UX process. So whilst we stay as specialists, I think what the collaborative approach allows you to do is learn a little bit about each other's specialisms. And I think this day and age, that's inevitable. You can't be brilliant at everything. So leave the specialists to what they do best, but also learn from them. Of course, from a professional development point of view or personal development point of view, you might think, oh, this UX stuff's cool, I might give that a go. You might become a UXer. Conversely, you might even encourage a UXer to start doing a little bit of development. And I guess in smaller companies, it's sort of inevitable that people will wear multiple hats anyway.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point as well. And it is worth considering. Everything going well now, that is brilliant. It's really good to hear. The thing that can't be allowed to ever happen is, I suppose, for that complacency to kick in over time. And I can attest to this happily. One of the first things that people try to save time, try to save budget on, it's this kind of thing. It's the meetings with UXers. It's the research phase at the beginning. But actually, this is where you really have to keep fighting the good fight, as it were. When down the line someone is looking to save time and they start trying to dial back on these conversations and these working sessions and everything like that, it's making sure you keep up the pressure and you remember that the reason things have been going well is because you've been doing these things. So if someone does try to start dialing back on those, then remember that actually these are one of the greatest strengths that we have, and getting rid of that will have negative consequences nearly overnight.
Yeah, that's very true. And the same is true as if the devs and the UX and the designers stop speaking, you can very quickly go off track as a developer. I already given some examples of that. Let's just do this. That'll be fine. We don't need to ask the designers. The designers see it and they go, we explicitly missed it out for a really good reason, because when the users were spoken to, they said they never saw that. They didn't understand it. So keep talking to each other, keep feeding back from each other, and you will learn. I've learned so much about UX since I've been at Cyberduck. Try and avoid menus that go deeper than 2 levels. What's the other one I've learned recently? Can't think of it. Another one that came up really recently. You will pick stuff up, but always go back to the experts. And the more you can learn off each other, the more time you will save as a project. Ultimately, what we're trying to do here is create an awesome website as quickly / cheaply as possible that meets the user's needs. And when I mean cheaply, I don't mean pound shop, if you have those in your country. What we're talking about is the value for money side of things. You don't spend 10 days doing something when you can do it in 2. Often a design will come to you and you'll go, oh, that looks really hard. It will take me 10 days. Where you just go back to the designer and say, can we change it to this? You can do that out of the box. It will take us 10 minutes. Now, clients probably don't care which of those 2 solutions you used. It will be suggested by the designer for a reason, but that reason might not be based on the best understanding they have of Drupal. If you can come back with a quicker solution, the client will be happy. You just save them, the best part of 2 weeks' work, and that's the really important part here. If you rebuild everything every time, you will blow budgets or timescales. If you are repeating yourself constantly, the same is true. You don't learn from each other. You're not working efficiently. So the techniques we're talking about today, the collaboration, the toolkits, the getting people involved earlier, have made a huge difference to how we've worked. Certainly since I've been at Cyberduck, and I know it's something that we've been working on, even before that.
Great. So really what we'd like to do then at this point is just open up the floor to hear any questions that you might have. Of course, just feel free to type any questions in the chat. We'll open up the discussion.
We've got our cameras back on, aren't we? In case you've forgotten what we look like.
I'm stuck on the presentation, I'm afraid. I can't, if I try to get back to
everyone's got to look at me. I don't know what's worse. You can probably come off.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes left, so we have time for a couple of questions.
Cool.
So we have a question from Michael who says, any advice on dealing with clients who ignore UX recommendations and design with pie in the sky ideas?
Yes, this is. I mean, this is something that we're very familiar with. I wish I could say that there was one out of the box solution, but it tends to come down to your understanding of the individual client. That will be really important, because some people, some personality types will respond to things that others won't. One thing that I think is really good when you are getting a lot of pushback is lean into data or lean into what you've heard from the users. So for instance, we when it comes to user interviews, we use tools like Dovetail so that we can have that bank of all of the different interviews, the recordings, all of the quotations, transcripts, everything, all there. And what that allows us to do is pull out specific snippets of what users have said, but not just in text, because text, obviously, a lot of the time the impact can kind of be worn away. Not to say that there's a level of distrust, but when it is, for instance, me as a UXer just saying, oh, well, this is what the users say, that's one thing. But when we can show a video or an audio clip of the user saying it, sometimes it's a case of tough love will make the client start understanding. Or if you are aware early on, then maybe you can start tailoring the kind of research that you're going to carry out to make sure that you're getting the kind of data that will sway the client. So if it needs to be more facts and figures oriented, then start running a few surveys, or again, lean into the SEO and things like that, so that we can really put facts in front of the client. There are loads of different things like that I think are great. One of the things actually which I've done on a few recent projects, which we never typically really used to do, but one of our first activities around the point where we would be, in our immersion phase, understanding any research that they've already got and things like that, is actually putting, a little bit of time into actually almost educating the client about UX. So whether that's talking about usability principles, going through, the Nielsen Norman and Porter and all of those kind of different theorists, and really explaining the thinking behind it, bringing in the kind of case studies that demonstrate the improvements, again, the figures that really back up the importance of UX. And also looking into the challenge at hand, thinking, where are there different areas of best practices that we can bring in, we can talk about? And it goes back to the point that Duncan was saying, knowledge sharing, I find, is always one of the best ways to get people on side, because chances are it's not necessarily that there's, some deep issue, which means that the client can't appreciate UX. It's that they don't understand it necessarily, or potentially they don't understand it as well as you, or as you do. So taking the time to help them to understand, I think it is absolutely invaluable. And we've had some clients go from being really, really broadly skeptical about the benefits of UX to being absolute, utter converts by the time that the project gets further on, when they start seeing, not only when they start to understand, but when they start seeing the effects of it when it comes back in testing and when the website's gone live and everything like that. So yes, there are a lot of things you can do. I hope that some of that answered your question. I know that I can get a bit carried away.
Never, James, never.
No,
There's a really good question here from someone who's decided to remain anonymous, so they're probably a designer here. The question is, was there any pushback from the designers when the idea for a component kit was introduced? Yes, there was. The designers said, we don't create cookie cutter websites here. And of course, they're right. Every single website we do is different. What we tried to encourage them to think about was, do you really want to just keep creating news cards or event cards or headlines or that sort of stuff? And of course, they don't want to keep doing that over and over again. They have total flexibility in how they design those components. We sub-theme from everything. So in actual fact, they're limited a little bit. Let's not go crazy. Let's not create a super duper out there website which users are going to come and look at and go, I don't understand how to use this. Of course, we use these same components anyway. So, okay, design those components to look nice, but use your creative juices to design the other pages, the event pages, the calendars, the blogs, the interactive elements. We have a really cool client at the moment. I think I can mention that we're redoing the Commonwealth website, and they have a timeline and how the history of the Commonwealth, and that they can spend, the UX and the designers can concentrate more time of the budget for design on these really cool components that we don't have yet. We're going to create a new component for it. So yes, there was quite a lot of pushback, but it's not about stifling creativity at all. It's about freeing designers up to concentrate on the things which are new, are different. And it's all about celebrating the differences.
Yes, I can't agree more. As one of the designers who was a bit reluctant when they first heard the way that we were going to start taking things, ultimately, and Duncan has really said it, the areas that we're able to save time, the things that we're going to use most often when it comes to these component kits for working with Drupal, they're not the interesting parts of the design. When you set out to, let's say, design the average homepage, for instance, it's the same question every time. You're going to need some cards, you're going to need some banners, you'll need a few very consistent things, but that realistically, you're not going to be doing your finest, most creative work there, because those things are very, very they are what they are. They're functional, and that's kind of the extent of it. What we can then start worrying about instead is, well, how does the interaction with the card work? Because we don't have to spend the time just simply building the thing. We can think about, well, what happens when you hover on the card? What happens when you click on the card? And if you take practical examples like the Oscar Kilo website, that, as most websites do, there's a lot of very standardized components across that site and with other sites as well. But what there is on top of that is really cool, really detailed functionality around e-learning and booking platforms and all of these kind of things that go along with it, the calendars and so on. We were able to spend a lot of time really poring over those parts of the experience that really worried about the service provision element of what Oscar Kilo do. We were able to really think about those things, and in doing so, create some really cool designs, things that not only do they work, but they work well, things that we're really proud of. And a lot of the reason why we can do that is because we saved time in other places. We saved time with the improved communication, meaning there was less back and forth and crisis management on different aspects of the design and build. We saved time by using consistent blocks throughout the site and things like that. So yeah, just really to back up what Duncan said, it's really helping us to produce our best work as UXers. And I think the only barrier to being on board with it is just understanding what's actually being proposed. And that's why I quite like the comparison, for instance, of working with something like material design or building for iOS, the things where you have consistent elements that you have to use. It really is quite similar, at least. That's a good way to explain it to UXers, I would say.
Okay, thank you for that. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so I don't think we have time for any more questions.
Okay, great. Well, we hope that we have helped to inspire you to push for greater collaboration between UX and dev teams at your company, or that we've simply confirmed that you're already doing everything brilliantly. Either way, it's it's been great to have you here. And it's also worth noting here at Cyberduck, we're always looking to hire new talent. So if you do like the sound of the way that we work, then do check out the careers page at cyberduck.co.uk. And more than anything else, thank you for listening. Thank you for giving us your time today.
And enjoy the rest of DrupalCon.
Yes, absolutely.
Power to the Drupal ears. Thanks everyone for listening.
Hey, thanks everyone.